So it's lovely to see you all, and it's really very lovely to see some very dear friends. And I've moved you to this screen so I can see you. All right. You'll know who you are. I'm going to dedicate this talk to all of those who have taught me the Dharma and enabled me over the years to deepen my practice. And of course, there are many hundreds of people in that category. And I also am dedicating it to all my colleagues in the NHS who taught me so much. And part of this talk is a giving back to the NHS. I'll say more. I am sure that within this audience, there are loads of you who work for or have worked for the NHS. Let's have a show of hands. Who has or does work for the NHS? Thank you very much. So it's the biggest employer in the UK, and it's one of the biggest in the world. Perhaps second to Walmart and the Red Army in China. So what I'm going to do, the title is Communicating, Sharing and Living the Dharma in the World of Work. And have I got about 25 minutes, Rajatara? 25 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start by saying where the impetus for this talk came from. Then I'll give you a bit of a history of my own life at work. I'll talk about some turning points or significant moments or tools that have really, really made a difference. And then I'll talk about now. And it is relevant to the topic of the retreat. I didn't perhaps bring that out in my title. It just occurred to me as I was writing the talk that all of us can be a fourth sight wherever we are, on the bus, at work, in the shrine room. And that's very, very relevant to reflect on, I think. Not that one sets out to be a particular sort of fourth sight, but because our practice has an impact. And I think, many of us yesterday were reflecting on how to take ourselves more seriously. And one of the ways is to think, in what way am I a fourth sight? Okay, without worrying about, oh my God, maybe I'm not being a fourth sight. Okay. So the starting point for this talk was me giving Kalyana Prabha a lift to the station from Adistana to Malvern. And she asked me, I've known her a very long time. She was my Mitra study leader. And she asked me, so what are you doing work-wise these days? And my response surprised me deeply. It moved me even. Because for me, work has always been a really important part of my Dharma life. And what I realized as I talked to her was that it's been a very strong path of integration. I'll come back to that later. So first of all, a bit about my life, my history as a worker. So I've really wanted throughout my Dharma life to work in the world. It's been a very important part of my life. I've also needed an income. I wanted an income, actually. Let's just be really honest. I've wanted an income and I've needed one because I'm a mum. And although my son's dad lived nearby, I did most of the childcare. And I wanted him to have a life that included school holidays and trips abroad and all that. And I wanted to fund him to go to university. And that's why one of the reasons I needed an income, but I wanted one as well for myself. I also had a very, very strong calling to be of service to humanity and to help to reduce pain and suffering. and also to help people become happier. That's developed over the years. And to enable people to be the very best they can. So to achieve their potential, to have a sense of fulfillment, meaning, and purpose in their life. And because I spent so long at work, I did some maths yesterday. Do you know, over 30 years, one can spend about 607, no, I'll just look at the numbers again, 67,000 hours of work over 30 years. And that was without any overtime. And since I worked for the NHS, overtime was normal. Okay, so a lot more. And I used to, when I worked in the NHS, I would see about 900, I'd have 900 contacts a year with people. Isn't that a lot of people? Goodness me. So what did I do? So I worked in the NHS for 34 years, in hospitals, in GP surgeries, in a hospice, and I visited people at home. I was a dietitian. And I specialised in palliative care and being able to help people who couldn't eat properly. It was very strong medicine. I also worked in public health and was rather passionate about healthy eating. When I think back to how passionate I was, I cringe. Yeah, I cringe. It was a sort of naive, really, but very, very enthusiastic. And then I became a manager in the NHS of dietitians, but then other professions. And I very strongly identified with this career and this role, as some of you who've known me a very long time will know. I used to comment on the nutritional content of menus at retreat centres on a very, very regular basis. Actually, it did have an impact, I have to say. It's been helpful. However, it must have been a pain in the neck as well. I was also a mum. So that needs to be taken into account as well. So when I became a dietetics manager and a clinical manager, I reduced my hours only a bit, but I did that in order to have more time to practice and more time for the Sangha and to be a bit less stressed. I got involved with the Dharma in order to learn to not be stressed. Yeah, that was my way in. And I wasn't going to be a Buddhist. I was going to learn to meditate, and that was going to be the end of it. However, I fell in love with the Dharma. And more importantly, I was deeply inspired by women on retreat at Taraloka. And I kept going back because I wanted what they had, even though I didn't know what it was. I'm sure you all know what I mean. And Kulanandi taught me to meditate. Thank you, Kulanandi, in 1988. So when my son went to university in 2001, I'd just come back from being ordained, and I knew I couldn't be a dietitian anymore. I wasn't that person anymore. And when he went to university, it freed me up actually to do other things. So I did project jobs across the Northwest region. They were fab. I went to the Department of Health and travelled all over the place doing projects. And while I was there, I got trained for free in leadership development, coaching, and the magical Myers-Briggs, or MBTI, which is a personality preferences tool, which a lot of people find very helpful. And I really enjoyed it. But all the way through this work, it was all about enabling people to reach their potential, helping them to be better leaders so that their staff were less stressed and more fulfilled at work. Then in 2008, I became self-employed, part-time self-employed, part-time employed by the NHS. Why? Because I wanted more freedom. I wanted more space. I wanted to work more flexibly so I could go on retreat more. And so I had more time to give to the Sangha and to help on retreats. And this was a bit scary, wasn't it? As you would expect about your income. But I did very well because I've got a lot of contacts in the Northwest, 25 years worth of contacts. But it also meant I could be much freer. And in a way, I think it helped me to I don't like this phrase because it is a bit fixing. I sort of was able to reinvent myself. I let go of some of the conditions that were keeping me being who I was. And I really loved being self-employed because I loved the freedom. And I'll come back to what I was doing in a bit. However, for many years, perhaps until 2019, I felt very torn between my life at work and my life as an order member. It's actually quite emotional to say that, because I wondered if I did either well. I had a foot in two camps. I'd never worked in a team-based right livelihood. I'd got ordained from a very small outlying Sangha in Lancaster, where there wasn't an order team, as it were, to get involved in. I often had a sense of being not a proper order member, endeavouring to do my best to practice the Dharma. But I also really doubted that I would be able to ever work with order members in a collaborative way. Of course, I didn't know what that was like. But I really did do my best to try and practice the Dharma at work, especially in terms of communication. That mattered to me a lot. So some of the things that really made a difference to me were I moved to Manchester in 2010. Stopped living on my own in a beautiful place near the Lake District, and I moved to Manchester, which is not very nice compared to the Lake District. However, the Buddhist centre is really very impressive, as is the Sangha. And I moved into the women's community, which was very powerful experience because there was nowhere to hide. You know, when you live on your own, in a way, doesn't mean I was deeply unethical, but you can get away with things, especially in your mind. Whereas when you live in a women's community, particularly with somebody like Dayanandi, you cannot run away. And I really did want to be seen, but I didn't as well. And what happened was that Dayanandi took me on, and she sort of apprenticed me to learn to be in the order, in a big order context. She was Mitra convener, and I sort of supported her in that role unofficially. And she taught me a lot about how to be kind and how to be more human, even in challenging situations. So I'm very grateful to Dayanandi. The second thing that helped was that I found a book called Awake at Work by a man called Michael Carroll, Carroll. So Michael Carroll was a financier on Wall Street who practiced the Dharma. I can't remember what his tradition is, but it's a very well-known one in America. And he taught the Dharma on Wall Street. And his Dharma teachings in the workplace are based on the 7-point mind training verses by Atisha. And he's developed some mind training verses for the workplace. I'm going to tell you what the main 4 are. And then after I've given my talk, I'll put them in the chat box with the title of the book. So this is all about how to bring the Dharma into the workplace. And his thinking is having something to reflect on all day helps you to remember to bring the Dharma in. And I found it very helpful. The first one is balance the 2 efforts. So what this means is rather than thinking about achieving your key performance indicators and being very outcome focused, and how many patients you've got to see in a week and what you do about a waiting list and all that, which is NHS language. The idea is to also notice how you're doing. So start with where you are. Let go and be present in the present moment. Have a break, really, from the to-do list. So incorporating short breaks every day at work, even if it's just on the loo. You can do 3 minutes mindfulness of breathing on the loo. I tell you what, I've got hundreds of NHS staff doing that all over the country. It might have had an effect on productivity. Okay, number 2 is be authentic, which is about being true to who you are. It doesn't mean being authentic in the superficial sense we've been talking about. It means really knowing what's going on and doing your job from you, from your heart, rather than an image of how one's meant to be. The third one is practice Li. L is spelled L-I. And this is a Chinese word that means courtesy and helpfulness. So it means going out of your way to be kind and helpful, opening the door for somebody, making your colleagues a cup of tea. Is ordinary, daily courtesy and kindness and helpfulness. And the fourth one is work is a mess. So this is work is samsara, folks. So when things go pear-shaped, don't be surprised. Recognize it. It will be painful. It'll be upsetting. That's how it is. So it means practicing with whatever arises rather than waiting for there to be no difficulties before you start practicing. And the fourth thing that helped was me having the great good fortune to facilitate the Dharma Life course at Adhisthana in 2019. Oh, I find this very moving to talk about. So I was involved in designing, facilitating and holding the Dharma Life course for 9 women from all over the world. And I was able to bring in all my skills in training, leadership, mentoring into an explicitly Dharmic Triratna context. And I lived at Adhisthana for 5 months and I absolutely loved it. And I let go of knowing, I let go of the view that I wasn't a proper order member and that I would never be able to work in a team-based right livelihood. It had a very integrating effect, as you can imagine. And now, I mean, I do go around doing Myers-Briggs stuff with a lot of people in the movement, but I know I do it from a more dharmic perspective now. So let's move on to right now, because I've got about 8 minutes to do that. So yeah, I was very, very grateful for Adhisthana. Even it was incredibly challenging. It was incredibly challenging, but I loved it, and it made an enormous difference to my Dharma practice. So what am I doing now? So these days, in the world of work, I'm completely freelance, and I'm a leadership development consultant, which sounds terribly grand, but I'll tell you what that is. So I'll come back to the conversation with Kalyana Prabha. So Kalyana Prabha said to me, "What are you doing these days then?" And I said, "Oh, I'm teaching people to be better leaders and I coach individual leaders." And she said, "Oh, in what way is that the Dharma then?" And I said, "Well, it's all about helping them be better people, about them finding a way to lead with integrity. It's about them becoming happier and less stressed." And then I thought, crikey, Taravandana, that sounds like the Dharma. So, of course, it's not the Dharma. The vision's not as great as in the Dharma. It's a bit like people learning mindfulness in a secular mindfulness program. It really is of benefit, but they're not necessarily learning the Dharma. because the vision is not perfect vision. Of course, that's another talk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience of leadership development, but I thought it would be really helpful to just say a little bit about what leadership is, so we're all on the same page. You might not agree, but this is the page I'm on, okay? So a leader is one who out of clutter brings simplicity, out of discord harmony, and out of difficulty opportunity. And this is a more simple definition. A leader is somebody who influences through what they do, what they say, and how they do and say it. And it's the how that is the bit that distinguishes effective leaders. So leaders influence others through what they do, what they say, and how they do and say it. And I'm assuming here, I'm talking about leadership in the public sector and in companies where people values are of importance. And another bit of leadership theory is that people will follow a leader that they can trust. And trust has got 3 components. I'm sorry, this is a little bit of input, isn't it? I hope you don't mind. Trust has 3 components. Number 1 is that the person is reliable and consistent, particularly in how they manage people and the messages they give. Reliable and consistent. The second one is they're capable. They can do their job. And thirdly, that they demonstrate benevolence and care. You might like on your own at some point to just think about people you trust and people you don't trust and ask which one of those 3 might not be there when you're not trusting. But also in terms of yourself as a person of influence, to what extent are you reliable and consistent, capable and caring and benevolent? Do you know what? It's like reading the Karaniya Metta Sutta. All of those 3 appear in the Karaniya Metta Sutta. And we also know from lots of research that the leaders who engage people the most, as in get their hearts and their heads involved at work, which you have to do in a public sector, what they're able to do is be available and demonstrate that they care, have integrity, and have interest in you and your development. It sounds a bit like an order member, doesn't it? Sometimes. So all of this takes self-awareness. Yeah. Leaders who want to really develop and be really effective leaders become effective because they commit to a lifelong journey of self-development. And that is my own personal experience. They don't just go on a course. Something clicks and they know they've got to become more self-aware. They know they've got to confront their habits and their tendencies. They've got to take responsibility for their mental states, particularly for managing stress, because managers who are stressed has a terrible effect on the stress levels of others. And these days, particularly in the public sector, we talk about the need for compassionate leaders. So leaders who are able to get the job done, but demonstrate care all the time. Not easy. So my own journey then is, it sometimes feels like running a leadership development program. Or maybe I'll just tell you that currently I'm running 2-year-long leadership development programs. One for an NHS trust for people like ward managers, team leaders, consultant doctors. and one that is for nurses and physios and dietitians, etc., who want to get into research. They're very long programs. They're a day a month for 12 months. And sometimes facilitating those programs is a mirror for me. Yeah. And sometimes I learn a skill, a tool, a way to do something that is a way of practicing a facet of the Dharma. For example, I'll use Myers-Briggs. So for me, Myers-Briggs, yes, is a way to learn to help people particularly in the world who are not into loads of self-development like we are in the Dharma life. It's a way of helping them to shine the mirror of self-awareness on themselves and to understand why that colleague bugs them so much. It's nearly always because they've got a different personality. Yeah. And I've learned a lot that myself. I've also learned a lot about thinking skills. And more recently, I've been learning about tools in how to collaborate. Collaboration is a very interesting thing that I could talk about another time. And it's like I'm communicating my Dharma practice when I'm teaching leadership development. It goes both ways. So I learn stuff from developing leaders, and I know it's my being that makes the difference. These days, I know it's me that makes the difference. It isn't that I have to know all these different tools and skills. And I don't understand that. So there seems to me to be less separation and more, I feel like my work life and my Dharma life are more integrated. And I'm just going to give you 3 little examples of where I've seen this play out. So I just finished a leadership program, and a podiatry manager, a chiropodist manager, came up to me and said at the end, "Do you know, I had no idea people's skills mattered. I don't understand how we could manage to sit in front of people and do their feet if he didn't realise that people's skills mattered." And he had taken on to develop his capacity to communicate. Another person was somebody I've been coaching over the last 6 months, as a brand new manager who had an incredibly low self-esteem. And she's learnt to love herself and learnt to recognise that what makes the difference is looking after herself. She's then better able to look after others. And then the third one is my sister. She and I fell out in March 22. And we did recover from that, obviously we did. And she then got involved in a holistic weight management program, which required her to keep a journal of what was going well and what she was grateful for every day. And she invited me to do that with her as her buddy. I only did that bit, not the weight management bit. And she asked me to do it because she said, "I think you'll understand this." And we met online every week for a year to review what we'd learnt from that process. She gave up work as a hotel manager after 40 years because she realised that it was tiredness that was making her unhappy. Yeah, that's tremendous. So I think I've said enough. It's time for me to stop. I do have a sense that teaching clinical staff to be better leaders is a gift for me and for them. I'm giving back, and I'm learning a lot from them. It's much harder in the NHS now than even when I worked in it. And I'm deeply grateful to the NHS for all the opportunities it gave me, giving me a very strong sense of belonging and making a difference, and for all the people and the meaning and purpose that arose from it. So thank you.